1998. That's the consent form in this case, is it not?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Bryan signed that for you, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And when you were advising him in the consent form, whether you were thinking about it at the time, you indicated that you were looking at aggravated assault and homicide. Okay. In context, the aggravated assault that you're investigating is the tragic shooting of Ahmaud Arbery.
Was that a question?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Okay, and that was your understanding?
Yes.
And you would assume, based on what you said, that that would be Mr. Bryan's understanding?
Objection to speculation.
I'll rephrase.
Thank you.
Did you give Mr. Bryan any reason to believe that you were investigating anything different
Then an aggravated assault?
than the shooting of Ahmaud Arbery?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. And on this same line, in your police report, you summarized the salient facts about what Mr. Bryan was relating to you, did you not, in a written report?
Yes, I summarized them.
Okay. Is it fairly safe to say you've been trained in writing police reports? A little bit.
Yeah, I guess.
You went to school, and you certainly seem capable of using big words. Am I correct?
Sometimes.
Okay. Your summary of the testimony you've related today amounted essentially to one sentence in that report, and I'm going to direct your attention to the bottom third of the third paragraph, if you'll take a moment and look at that. Do you see the sentence Mr. Bryan described?
Yes.
Does that refresh your memory as to what you wrote in your report?
Yes.
All right. Mr. Bryan described maneuvering his truck.
Objection to hearsay, Judge. You can't just read the report.
Did you write in your report, your summary of all this discussion about what Mr. Bryan's doing out there on the street that day as maneuvering his truck?
Objection, Judge. You can't just read the report. It's hearsay.
It says, that's the police narrative, correct?
That's his.
Right. So he's describing what he heard in the statement that was just put in.
He's summarized all his testimony today.
Yeah, let's not read from his report then. I mean,
Okay.
you got the statement in. That's what I was discussing at the break.
I stand corrected. You were the lead agent in this case, am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. And if at any point, and I'll come back to that in a second. Now, is it fair to say that homicide cases are not like other cases?
I guess.
In some ways, they're not. Okay. Is it fair to say you tried to explain the process to Mr. Bryan as best you could
The process of what?
of your investigation, what you were doing?
Perhaps.
Okay. Now, you did not Mirandize Mr. Bryan at this time, am I correct?
I don't recall. I don't think so, but I'm not sure.
Okay. The consent that Mr. Bryan gave you was for the
Yeah.
consent form. Now, if Mr. Bryan, in your presence, had admitted to the commission of a major felony, would you not have felt obligated to Mirandize him at that time?
Yes.
Okay, because at that time, had he said something like that, had you or he understood it that way, he might not have been free to leave.
Objection to speculation, Judge.
Not speculation, it's fact.
Let's restate the question.
I'll restate it. if you had understood, or Mr. Bryan appeared to you to believe, that he had admitted to a major felony, at that point you would have been obligated in your training to Mirandize him.
Yes.
Because at that point questions might have arisen as to whether he was free to leave.
Yes.
And you certainly wouldn't want to mess up your first murder investigation by failing to Mirandize a subject or a target of your investigation. Sir, at the time that this case was transferred from the Glynn County Police Department to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Mr. Bryan was still considered by your agency, well after the date of this interview, a witness in this case.
Yes.
Okay. And that's memorialized in the report that your agency provided to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation.
Yes.
So is it fair to say that among the words that didn't come up in this interview besides citizen arrest was false imprisonment?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Among the legal terms that did not come up in this interview, in addition to citizen arrest, the phrase false imprisonment never came up in this interview.
No.
Because that wasn't your focus,
No.
and that wasn't what you heard.
No.
And I believe you reassured Mr. Bryan that your agency is required to investigate any homicide, regardless of justification.
Maybe. I don't remember for sure.
Okay. Well, it's been a long time since you'd conducted this investigation. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Directing your attention to the bottom third of page 2.
Okay, yes.
So basically, you assured Mr. Bryan that you were required to investigate any homicide, no matter what evidence there was of justification. That's your duty.
Yes.
And that's in fact what you were doing.
Yes.
In that context, that you're talking to a witness in this case, you didn't ask Roddie Bryan how far he got in school.
No.
You didn't ask Roddie Bryan if he had, for example, any learning disabilities.
No.
Okay. You didn't even ask him if he could read and write the English language, although that was presumed from the execution of the consent form. Okay. Now, there's been some discussion in this case of maps, and I'm not going to show you all of the maps, but I'm going to ask you if you recognize this document, which I believe is already in evidence. One moment, John.
If we're looking at numbering, let's get together and